Damien Hines.
Thank you very much, Joe, and good morning. Can I bring you on to online harms?
Yes.
And I want to first, could you just give us any update that you have on online harms, on the legislation, the identity, or confirming the identity of the regulator, the powers they will have, and your approach to harms which are so-called legal but harmful, both for adults and children?
Yes, so where we are with the development of the process, clearly we had the initial response. In terms of the full response, I have agreed all of those recommendations on it. I've agreed them with the Home Secretary. We are currently just finalising the clearance process through number 10 in order to get that out and into the public domain. In respect of the regulator, we have indicated that our preferred regulator is Ofcom. I'm continuing to have conversations with Ofcom on the assumption that that would be the case, but clearly again we will have to formally confirm that in the right run, because as you know, as a former cabinet minister, I have to wait till we've secured full collective agreement to say that is definitively the position, but that is very much the basis that we are working on.
Can I give you take an example of self-harm as a online harm? And I remember a conversation with a representative of a photo-based social media network who had just changed their policy on posts on self-harm to have 3 different categories, and depending on whether it was sort of promotion or disclosure or recovery, there were different groups of people would be able to see these photos if it was in your network or not. And I remember hearing this person describing this and thinking, she seemed a very decent person, a very right-minded person, but I knew of no reason to believe that she was the best placed person to decide what the exposure of this generation of children should be to pictures of self-harm, nor especially why her organisation, which is a commercial company, was best placed to do that, balancing against their other objectives. Are they?
Well, that is precisely what we're setting up the regulation to determine. So the structures that we will impose a duty of care. The operators will have, social media platform operators will have to be transparent about how they are enforcing that duty of care, and they will be accountable to a regulator as to whether those are appropriate measures. Because clearly I as a minister can't make that individual determination. The point is to set up a structure to enable to hold them to account, and if they fail to do so, they will face legal sanctions.
But it would be against their own published terms and conditions, so they would still be determining what they thought was the appropriate distribution or exposure of, for example, images on self-harm. And you could say the same about eating disorders and various other things.
I think there's sort of 2 elements to it, isn't there? The social media provider will come forward with their terms and conditions. We won't just say, it wouldn't be we, I have to be careful, the regulator wouldn't just say fine. They would say, well, look, are these proper sort of, do they have proper and effective terms and conditions? A, and there'll be a process for doing that, and then B, there'll be, if they don't abide by them and properly abide by them, then there will be consequences of doing so. So the essence, look, what we're trying to do, and it's a difficult balance, as I know you'll appreciate, that there are certain things that are very easy to deal with, which is illegal harms, and we make those illegal. We're treading this path between the sort of state regulating the internet and social media, whilst at the same time trying to protect the most vulnerable. I am acutely mindful of the particularly, and I think more and more boys, but teenage girls are particularly susceptible to self-harm and eating disorder websites and so on. So I have in my mind, can I credibly say that this regime is addressing that, whilst at the same time operating in a free society?
I think that's encouraging to hear. Can I press you, Secretary of State, on this point about the terms and conditions? Because I think it becomes fundamental. Yes, we say the regime will hold companies to account for their terms and conditions, but they have to be the right terms and conditions. Exactly. And then I think the question becomes, who is conducting that test? At the front line is going to be the regulator. But is it going to be the regulator that decides what should be in scope, or is it going to be you and your department, or is it going to be Parliament?
Well, and again, if you can take the minded to with the sort of appropriate caveat, I think the way we would resolve this we would through secondary legislation to be approved by Parliament, define particular specific areas of legal but harmful activity that we would particularly want attention to be paid to. We would take advice on that. Ministers, clearly from the regulator and others, ministers would make those recommendations, and Parliament would approve them in the normal way with the SI process.
Can I take you to another example? Yeah. So we had TikTok at this committee recently, and they admit that at a period in their history they had a policy which essentially downgraded LGBT content and took action against certain content depicting people with disabilities. And they've said they've changed that policy. It's also alleged that they have had a policy, this matter is contested, but that they've had a policy of taking action against content which distorts a view of some other country's history. And an example given is the events in Tiananmen Square or ongoing issues with Taiwan. Now, you might say the former category, LGBT and disability content, would be illegal because those are protected characteristics. But clearly, being a member of the Chinese Communist Party is not a protected characteristic one way or the other. Should it be in scope for the consideration of what constitutes an online harm if you have a social media platform that tries to skew political discussion?
Well, I think that, and again, without knowing all the details of it, I think that starts to stray into the area of misinformation and disinformation, which is clearly a harm that we would seek to identify.
And more generally, if you end up with social media algorithms which give preference to content that tends to frighten, disgust or shock, which lets falsehoods spread more quickly than truth and generally deepens divisions in society and politics, even if no law has been broken along the way, is that a legitimate area for the legislation, for the regulator to be concerned with?
Well, certainly the transparency around such algorithms is a very important part of it, and understanding what's happening, the appropriateness of it. What I'm slightly careful of in this is that there are two steps. First of all, this has to be confirmed as agreed government policy and announced in the appropriate way, and then within that we will have mechanisms to identify specific categories of harm and for Parliament to be engaged with that process. But I think all the points that you're making are wholly legitimate points about areas of concern.
Just while I have the conscience at work, can we turn to more direct, immediate threats to children in particular on the internet, some of which have been particularly prevalent during this pandemic for all the reasons we understand. The UK Safer Internet Centre, I understand, relies partly on EU funding, which obviously will expire, as other EU funding streams will. When that expires, will you continue the funding of the Safer Internet Centre?
Well, clearly we are going through a spending review process with the Treasury, but the default assumption I'm working on is to seek to continue funding where things had received that EU funding. But as you all know, that is all subject to ongoing discussions as part of the spending review process.
And finally, for me, I'm sure you'll have seen this article in this morning's Telegraph on gaming disorder. Which I think it reports on a meta-study bringing together previous studies, which works out that the number of people with gaming disorder now apparently is estimated as being higher than the number of problem gamblers. I'm not saying that makes it a bigger problem than problem gambling, but a wider prevalence. Is this something that your officials at DCMS are working with Department of Health officials on to come up with an approach and an integrated plan?
I'm afraid, given that, mainly because I was preparing for this select committee, I didn't have my usual chance to read the Telegraph, so I haven't seen that specific article, but I think it raises important points, and if I may, I'll follow up with you by letter on that.
Thank you.